So this is joint work with Enrique Manjavacas and Fonteyn, in which we introduce a novel approach to lexical diversity in historical corpora. Perhaps one of the simplest and most basic corpus statistics is the number of unique words in a text. This number gives us a quick and straightforward picture of the lexical diversity of a text. Lexical diversity is then typically implemented by measuring the number of unique letter combinations or unique letter sequences. And that's of course very easy to do, but it doesn't necessarily describe the lexical richness of a text adequately. This becomes clear when we compare the following few sets of words. So here we have a set, cat, progesterone, remember, blue, and we can compare that with a set cat, dog, blue, red, or cat, dog, bird, rabbit, or even with a set of different spelling variants of the word neighbor. Now, if we define a unique word as a unique orthographic combination of letters, then all these sets have a lexical diversity of 4. But it doesn't really seem to match our intuition, does it? The first set seems much more diverse semantically than the third set, let alone the last set with only historical spelling variants of the same word. In our paper, we investigate the application of a new measure of lexical diversity, which takes the semantic differences between words into account. This measure is called functional diversity, which we borrow from the field of ecology, where a similar problem exists. Compare, for example, these two ponds. In both ponds, we find 4 unique animal species, and as such, we could conclude that the biodiversity is the same in both ponds. But intuitively, that categorical measure of diversity doesn't seem right. The pond on the right looks much more diverse than the pond on the left. And functional diversity recognizes this intuition by including the similarities and differences in species traits. The specific implementation of functional diversity that we apply was originally developed by the biostatistician Anne Chow and her colleagues. Now, in this framework, we group together all word types with a distance that is less than a certain threshold. Let's call that threshold tau for convenience. For example, take the words apple and pear, which are represented here as circles. And the size of these circles represents how many tokens we have of each word. Now, the distance between these two words is measured to be 0.4, just for the sake of this example. If we set the threshold tau to a value that is equal or smaller than this 0.4, then each word type forms its own functional group. So one group for apple and one for pear, which then yields a total functional diversity of 2. Now, beyond this first level, where tau is set to the minimal distance, we start allowing words to form groups. So for example, if we set the distance threshold to 0.6, apple and pear are merged together. Yet they don't form a single functional group, because they only overlap partially and not completely. So in the framework we employ, each type can contribute to one or more functional groups in a way that is proportional to their frequency. To know the size of a functional group then, we take all tokens of a word type, so for instance pear, plus a fraction of the tokens of any other word type, like apple, that is functionally indistinctive of pear. Now, the higher the threshold for tau, the more word types are merged into functional groups. So here we add the word computer, which has a distance of 0.8 to apple and 1 to pear. With tau set to 0.6, computer still forms its own functional group, but with a value of 0.8 or higher, it is partially merged with apple. Note that this also updates the composition of the apple functional group. We can continue increasing the threshold value until eventually all words will belong to the same functional group. So in other words, this method enables us not to just talk about diversity at one level, but at a continuum of levels.
The computation of functional diversity requires a way of measuring similarity between words, and specifically we focus on lexical semantics. Traditional lexicon-based methods like WordNet are discouraged whenever the goal is to compute the similarity in an open set scenario, where full coverage would be hard to obtain. A second option is to compute similarities in a word embedding space, such as the one obtained through an algorithm like Word2Vec. The problem we face here is that the quality of embeddings for infrequent words is poor, considering that the corresponding vectors have been updated very sparsely during training. For this study, we focused on contextualized word embeddings extracted from a large language model like BERT. The intuition is that even in the case of low-frequent words, including, for example, misspelled words, a model like BERT can still rely on the sentential context in order to infer the semantics of a word. In terms of models, we relied on MacBERT, which is a historical language model for English following the architecture and parameterization of BERT-based uncased.
So why is functional diversity useful? Well, first, we found that diversity at the level of functional groups is affected less by non-meaningful variations such as OCR errors and orthographic variation, which are very common in historical corpora. To learn more about these results, we refer to section 4.1 in the paper. We also found that the attribute diversity framework allowed us to identify text pairs that had approximately the same number of unique word types, but a diverging number of functional groups. This indicates that, while the size of the text vocabularies may be the same, one text actually covers a broader semantic range with its vocabulary. A nice example to illustrate this is the pairing of this fiction text with an advertisement, where the advertisement has fewer functional groups at d-mean than the fiction text. So why is that the case? Well, because advertisements often present a list of closely related services and/or goods, and hence, while they may use a large number of unique words, they cover less functional semantic ground than, for instance, a scene description in fiction texts. Of course, this short paper was just an exploration of an idea, and more work has to be done. In fact, there are a few directions in which all of this could go. First, we worked with MacBERT, but there are other ways of implementing functional similarity. For instance, MacBERT produces token embeddings, so to obtain a single representation per unique string of characters, we work with an averaged representation. This may not be ideal, and perhaps there are other ways to approach this, which is something we are looking into. But also beyond the technical side of things, we do see concrete case studies to which this method can be applied. Naturally, we can apply this to studies in stylistics. So we can ask questions like, does an author's vocabulary become more diverse as they age? And if it does it become more evenly spread across more semantic fields? Or does the vocabulary rather just become more detailed within the same number of fields? Or we could ask questions like, can we characterize literature for children or second language learners, which is often defined at different reading levels, in terms of categorical as well as functional diversity? And perhaps you have other ideas as to what this can be applied to, and we are very excited to discuss those with you. Thank you for listening.